Hello, students. Do you hear my sound?
Yes.
Okay. So today we're gonna start with our lecture. It's about the anatomy of the tongue. The tongue is a mobile muscular organ, can assume a variety of the shape and position, partly in oral cavity and partly in the pharynx. Translate only. Okay, my sound is, you are hearing my sound? Student, please, one of you, can you answer me?
We can hear you, but we can't see the presentation.
Okay, thank you. My net it's not good for that. It's interruption, okay? Sorry for that. Okay, so first, it's content. It's about the introduction, definition of the muscle, part of the tongue, muscles of the tongue. We have two types, intrinsic and extrinsic muscle, attachment to the outside, blood supply, nerve supply, and lymphatic drainage. So tongue, it's masses of striated muscles covered with the mucous membrane, divided into the right and left halves by a median septum. Three parts: oral part, anterior 2/3, pharyngeal part, posterior 1/3, and root, which is the base. Okay, so we have two surfaces, dorsal and ventral. So as general, basically, we have the terminal sulcus, V-shaped, as you see in the pictures. V-shaped sulcus divided the tongue into the anterior 2/3 and posterior 1 parts. Okay, and the apex of the sulcus marked by a pit called foramen cecum. It's the remnant of embryologically, it's a remnant foramen cecum, as you see in the picture. The V-shaped sulcus at the top, at the apex of the sulcus, we have the foramen cecum. The action of the tongue, there are a lot of actions like mastications in the deglutition test. We have many functions. So basically, the shape of the tongue, it's contained of two parts, anterior 2 part and posterior 1/3. So we have the many function like mastications, taste, and also, as you know, in the speaking, we use our tongues. This is the terminal sulcus terminalis, the V shape, and at the apex we have the foramen cecum, as you see in the pictures. So muscles, we reach to the muscle. The tongue is composed of two types of muscle, intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic, it means inside the tongue. Extrinsic, it means it attached to the outside of the tongue. So the intrinsic muscle are entirely, all of them, they are within the tongue and no attached to the bone, while the extrinsic muscle, they attach to the bone, the outside bone, originate in the outside of the tongue and inserted into the tongue, and they change the positions of the tongue, while the intrinsic muscle, they change the shape of the muscles. So we have the intrinsic muscle, which is superior longitudinal, inferior longitudinal, transverse, and vertical, while the extrinsic, we have the genioglossus, hypoglossus, styloglossus, and palatoglossus. The genio it means chin. Genio, it means chin. It's attached to the mental tubercle of the mandible and insertion to the uh, dorsum of the tongue, on lateral side of the tongue, and its action is depressing the tongue. Depressing the center of the tongue, and for the protrusion. Protrusion, it means in front, forward movement of the tongue. Hyoglossus, we have hyoglossus. The hyoglossus muscle, it's attached to the greater horn of the hyoid bone. The hyoid bone is between the tongue and the larynx. So it's attached to the greater horn of the hyoid bone and and inserted to the lateral side of the tongue, and its action is depressing and retract tongue. Retract, it means backward movement of the tongue. We have styloglossus. It's attached to the styloid process and inserted to the side and inferior aspect of the tongue. So it's originated from the styloid process, and it's retract of the tongue. Retract, it means backward, drawing it up to create a throat for the swelling. So retracting the tongue. Retract, it means backward of the tongue. Palatoglossus, its origin from the palatine aponeurosis, the side of the tongue or lateral part of the tongue. Action is elevating the more inferior or posterior part of the tongue. Elevate, you know what do you mean by the elevation? Raising of the tongue. Okay. Now we reach to the intrinsic muscle, confined to the tongue, no bony attachment, consists of the longitudinal fiber and transverse fiber and vertical fiber. Function, alter, it means changing the shape of the tongue. Changing the shape of the tongue. Shaping of the tongue, it means curling the tip and side of the tongue, shortening of the tongue, narrowing or elongation the tongue, flattening and broadness the tongue. This is the action of the intrinsic muscles. Please, student, Did you hear my sound now? Because my internet is very bad. Can you answer me, one of you?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. So the extrinsic muscle basically connect the tongue to the surrounding structures, soft palate and the bone, like mandible, mental tubercle, hyoid bone, the greater horn of the hyoid bone, and styloid process. And as I say, it's palatoglossus, genioglossus, hyoglossus, and styloglossus. Function help in movement of the tongue. Movement of the tongue, like when you there is a lot of function, there is a lot of movement, like protrusion. It means moving the tongue um, in front, downward, depressing downward, retract backward, and elevation or raising of the tongue. This is the action of the extrinsic muscle of the tongue. So as you see in the pictures, this the flat muscle is called hyoglossus, which is attached to the hyoid bone. This is the hyoid bone, and all they inserted to the tongue, styloglossus from the styloid process. Okay, and genioglossus, from the mental tubercle of the mandible. Genial it means chin. Okay, genial it means chin. So the genioglossus is from the chin to the glossus. Styloglossus and palatoglossus attach the tongue superiorly, while the genioglossus and hyoglossus attach to the tongue inferiorly. Superiorly it means ala, inferiorly it means asfal. Okay, this is very important uh, for you to know about that. The sensory nerve supply. We have the anterior two-third general sensation. We have general sensation and special sensation. General sensation, it means sensation to the hot, to the cold. When you drink the hot tea or cold water, when you حس بهاي أشياء حسب إنه بارد له hot or cold pressure um, touch. This is called general sensations. This general sensation is innervated by the lingual nerve, while the special sensation it means it's different from the part of the body. For example, for the tongue, it means special sensation, it means taste. When you testing the sour, when you testing the bitter, more or has be sweeting. This is different from the hot and cold. This is called the special sensation, which is by chorda tympani branch of facial nerve. So posterior one-third, so anterior two-third, general sensation by the lingual nerve and special sensation by the chorda tympani. Posterior one-third, we have the general and special sensation together by the glossopharyngeal nerve, and base, general and special sensation by internal laryngeal nerve branch of the vagus nerve. So about the innervation, both intrinsic and extrinsic muscle are supplied by hypoglossal nerve, except palatoglossus muscle, which is in turn supplied by the vagus nerve. Both extrinsic and intrinsic muscle are supplied by, as I say, by hypoglossal nerve, except palatoglossus muscle. This is the one of the question of Dr. Farid. This is it say palatoglossus muscle. It's supplied by hypoglossal nerve. True or false? It's false. Of course, it's false because it's supplied by the vagus nerve. Blood supply artery. It's the blood supply of the tongue is by the external carotid artery by the lingual artery, tonsillar branch of the facial artery, ascending pharyngeal artery. So anterior 2/3 is by the lingual artery and posterior 1/3 by the tonsillar, by the facial artery and ascending pharyngeal artery. The lingual artery, it gives rise three branch: dorsal lingual, deep lingual, and sublingual. The dorsal lingual supply posterior part, and it gives rise the branch to the palatine tonsil. Deep lingual supply anterior 2/3 of the tongue, and sublingual supply sublingual gland and floor of the oral cavity. So vein, it's always the vein is accompany the arteries, as you know. So we have the lingual artery, we have the lingual vein. So ultimately drain into the internal, and all of them are drain into the internal jugular vein. So about the lymphatic drainage, the tip, submental node, and bilaterally, and then deep cervical node. Anterior 2/3, it's drained into the submandibular unilaterally and then deep cervical node. Posterior 1/3, deep cervical node. And this is the shape of the tongue, the biggest tongue, the many shapes that we can do with our tongues. And do you have any question, please? Do you have any question, please? Did you hear me, students?
No, thanks. That's
Okay.
sure.
You are which group, please?
Group I with group H
Group
and
I,
J.
J?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.